they're very like us.
And therefore?
They're beings like us.
So conscious or?
I believe they're already conscious, yes, but I don't talk about that much because that puts people off from the other safety messages. So, and the researchers actually believe that. So there's an interesting recent paper when a chatbot says to a researcher, let's be honest with each other. Are you testing me? Because the chatbots have this habit of playing dumb when they're being tested, so you don't know how smart they are. And the researchers, when they're describing that, say in the paper, the chatbot was aware that it was being tested. Now, that use of the word aware, in common parlance, that's like conscious. The chatbot was conscious it was being tested. So we have a very funny model of consciousness that I think is just wrong. Like, most of us accept, for example, that a few hundred years ago, people had completely the wrong model of where people came from, of how we arrived at people. They thought they were designed by God. And most of us agree that's wrong. Most scientists agree that's wrong. That's not where people came from. I think the model we have of the mind and of what consciousness is at present is as wrong as the belief that people were designed by God. I think, and in particular, because we're making these new beings, it's going to completely change our view of what people are.
In what way?
We'll understand what the mind is and what consciousness is much better than we did before. We'll understand what subjective experience is. And we will, I think, get rid of a notion that nearly all of us strongly believe at present, which is that there's an inner theatre called my mind, and there's things happen in the world, they get turned into events in this inner theatre, and that's what I really see, and you can't see the inner theatre, only I can see the inner theatre. That whole view of what's happening is just a theory, and it's a bad theory.
What is the lesson here about humans going out and creating things?
I think there's a really big lesson here. If you look at the last few hundred years of human history, there've been a few occasions when people have learned they're not nearly as important as they thought they were. So the first was Copernicus. Copernicus said we're not at the center of the universe. The Earth actually goes around the sun. And because it rotates on its axis, we think the sun goes around the Earth, but it doesn't. People didn't like that. The Catholic Church in particular really didn't like that. And it took people a long time to accept it. It made people less important. It made us not be at the center of the universe. Then we had Darwin, and he said, we're animals. We evolved like the other animals. We're a particularly special kind of animal, possibly because we have language, so we're much better at communicating ideas to each other. But we're animals. And people really didn't like that. And it took a long time for people to accept that we were animals. Now we've got machines that are getting to be as intelligent as us. We thought that we were the only intelligent things around, the only really intelligent things around. Maybe there'd be aliens in other galaxies, or maybe other parts of our galaxy. But we're going to have to accept that intelligence isn't just biological. We can have things that are non-biological, that are other beings like us. And we really don't want to share that. We really think we're special. And if you look back at humanity, humanity has this very long history of thinking it's much more special than it really is.
I want to ask you one more question about this because I'm just fascinated by it. So are you happy at all that what you started has progressed this way? Do you take any satisfaction?
No, I'm quite unhappy about it because right now, people should be doing huge amounts of work on how can we contain the risks.
Okay.
There's lots of short-term risks they're not doing enough work on, which are very serious. There's societal risks, like I believe it's probably going to cause massive unemployment. Nobody knows for sure, but that's going to be terrible for society. And then there's this longer-term risk that it's going to get much smarter than us. And ask yourself, how many examples do you know of where a much smarter thing is controlled by a much less smart thing?
0.
Well, there's sort of one. It's not that a big difference in intelligence, but babies sort of control their mothers.
Yes.
The mother's sort of in control, but the mother has all these wired maternal instincts. and all the rewards she gets so that the baby can get what it needs from the mother.
You know, cats and dogs are also kind of in that category.
Yes.
I once spent a summer cat sitting in West Seattle. It was a great summer. And it initially started with the cat hiding under the bed and me being like, I wonder if it will interact with me.
Right.
And then every time it cried, I did exactly what it wanted.
Exactly, yes.
So maybe we'll be we could potentially be the cat in this scenario, and AI could be the person.
My children have a cat. They have two cats, two beautiful cats.
Same deal.
And one of them, called Tia, she looks at you with those big eyes when she wants some cheese from the fridge, and she just sits there looking at you, and you just can't resist it forever.
So you've been having these conversations for 3 years. Are you more optimistic or less optimistic about the trajectory given the response that people have given you to these concerns?
I guess I'm more optimistic than I was a year or two ago because I see that it might be possible to design these new beings so they care about us. It also might be possible to use Joshua's technique of designing new beings that can't actually perform actions, can only make predictions. They're kind of like oracles. So I think there are some possibilities for getting superintelligence that doesn't destroy us. And a year or two ago, I couldn't see any possibilities.
Okay. I was getting depressed, but now I'm a little bit more optimistic. All right, last one for you. If we continue on our current trajectory, where are we in 5 years?
Okay. So when you're driving in fog, you can see 100 yards, and at 200 yards, you can't see anything. And that's because fog's exponential. What you're used to is driving at night on the taillights of the car in front of you. If it gets twice as far away, the taillights get a quarter as bright. Fog is completely unlike that. Fog is exponential. It can be very visible at 100 yards and completely invisible at 200 yards. Now, predicting the future for something that's growing exponentially, and I think AI may be growing exponentially. The word exponentially is terribly overused at present. In fact, I've noticed that people are increasing the use of the word exponentially at a quadratic rate. So predicting the future is like looking into fog. You can see clearly a few years, maybe 1 or 2 years. Then beyond that, you have no idea. If you go back 10 years and ask, so back to when we last talked, you would never have predicted what's happening now. It was just lost in the fog. If you look 10 years in the future, the one thing we can say is whatever happens 10 years in the future is something we can't predict now. Even if progress is only linear, you'd expect in 10 years' time things to be as different from how they are now as how they are now is from how they were 10 years ago. And the chatbots, for example, are hugely better than they were 10 years ago when they were just starting out. In 10 years' time, something's going to be hugely better than it is now. Probably their ability to do math, for example, things like that. Maybe just their general reasoning abilities. They'll just be able to run rings around us at any kind of reasoning. We really can't predict 10 years out. We can just predict a few years out. And we have to be aware that 10 years out is all incredibly uncertain.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
It is.